there was a point, and I was just joining the board, 2012, where we had our first global event. And that was a big, big step for Tourism Cares. We were primarily North American based, and to really step out and say, and even after doing one global event, we couldn't say we're a global organization. It's taken quite some time. And now that we're working with over 40 different destinations on our meaningful travel map, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that later on, I think we're finally at a place where we're starting to say that we're truly a global impact organization. And that just takes time. So when I think about the next 5 years, we want to continue to make a greater global impact. We need to continue to put a spotlight on local communities all throughout the world.
I'm Clay Coomer, and this is the Travel Insights Podcast. I am excited today to welcome a guest to the Travel Insights Podcast. And today we have Greg Takehara, and Greg spent nearly 24 years working in travel insurance for companies like Affinity and TripMate, but he has devoted the last 6 years to nonprofit work for Tourism Cares and the Future of Tourism Coalition. Please welcome to the podcast, Greg Takehara. And Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. It really does mean a lot, and to have you as a guest, and I am really interested to hear your story.
Well, thanks a lot, Clay. It's actually my great privilege. And, I think that you brilliantly summated my career, and very thankful to be sitting in this seat representing Tourism Cares, but have the travel insurance sector to thank for really allowing me to, find my place in this in our industry, and really give me just kind of a solid foundation. And so many within the segment have been ardent supporters of Tourism Cares, so I'm ever grateful.
Yeah, that's great. I think whenever there's like an intersection of for-profit capitalism that is travel insurance with the nonprofit and the authenticity that comes with Tourism Cares, I think that's a definitely a bridge that is worthwhile for sure.
Yeah, and I would say actually the other bridge, and I say this often for people who know me and have known me in the travel insurance space for as long as they have, and they think it's a huge departure in terms of my leaving. And I think you rightly so define the definition between for profit and nonprofit and that change. But I talk about the insurance element all the time, and I say, essentially, I'm doing exactly what I did before, which is risk management. And we are looking at protecting the assets of our planet and the assets of our travel product, the people and places of travel. And before, I used to have a policy to sell you, and now I don't. And now we have to self-insure as an industry and come together. And that's really essentially what Tourism Cares is doing. So from that aspect, I don't think things have changed in that much. But from that for-profit side to nonprofit side, it definitely has.
Yeah, that's so profound. I love that. So you just kind of gave a little bit of a brief overview of Tourism Cares, but I guess in general, your experience in the world of travel and tourism, and ultimately what inspired you to get involved with Tourism Cares.
So prior to joining Aon Affinity, I had my entree into travel and tourism from working with a tour operator, the Mark Travel Corporation. And so by the time that I was at Aon Affinity, I was probably some 10 years into the industry. And I had the opportunity to do a volunteer event that was Tourism Care's first ever cleanup event on Ellis Island. And it brought together 300 travel and tourism professionals to roll up our sleeves. And I still remember the tears in the eyes of the National Park Service representative who said, you did more work, your group did more work in one afternoon than we would have accomplished in months, perhaps even a year. And that got me thinking to the collective power of the travel and tourism industry and what we can do when we kind of put aside competition and we collaborate and work together. And that really, I had a bit of an epiphany. I really felt that this was something like an opportunity to give back, an opportunity to give back to the industry that gives us our livelihood, the opportunity to ensure that we have a better future for our industry. And so as a result, it took me down a journey to become a volunteer and a team leader, and then subsequently a board member in 2012. And just somehow serendipitously, every company that I worked with along my own personal career allowed me to support Tourism Cares in one way or the other. So it allowed me to have this trajectory where I just continued to give back and work with Tourism Cares in one capacity or another. And then in 2019, I had the opportunity to join the team as the CEO. And that was just, I think, at the right time for me in my career and kind of a culmination in a lot of ways. But it started with that 2003 event. The foundation or the legacy of Tourism Cares was very much founded in volunteerism. I think that at that time, if you can think back to that time, you're a lot younger than I am. We didn't have social media outlets. We didn't have the ability to crowdsource without an entity like Tourism Cares as being a conduit. We didn't have that ability to be able to go to a destination that said, this is a destination in need, and this is what they need. This is a destination in need that has now recovered, and they need your business. Now people can go out and do exactly that type of messaging. The destinations can do that messaging themselves. But at that time, Tourism Cares played a critical role in being that conduit and getting that messaging out to the industry at large. And so as we've evolved, we've kind of not necessarily stopped rolling up our sleeves, but we roll up our sleeves in a different way. We provide education and training to the industry to help them on their sustainability journey. We put a focus on local communities so that people can see how they can get off the beaten path and how they can support local communities, hence strengthening their ecosystems. Those are the types of things that have been the evolution of Tourism Cares in the 20 plus years that I've been involved, in the 20 plus years that it's been in existence, where we're still continuing to bring the industry together to really focus on that whole aspect of collaboration over competition, because we're represented by over 160 companies within travel and tourism that really span the entire scale of the industry. So whereas we were founded by tour operators and travel advisors, we've now expanded our bandwidth well beyond that segment to include, airline carriers and hoteliers and OTAs and every single element of the industry is represented in our community.
Yeah, I love that. I think the thing I love the most. I mean, I love it all. I love it all, but I really love the notion of collaboration as opposed to competition. I think I think it's really profound. And so I think a lot of us, I mean, in travel insurance in particular, right? We always, tend to have that competitive spirit and trying to come up with different ways to stand out in the market and have a different type of message that will resonate. But I think, you know, tourism cares, being a conduit of, of collaboration and caring about something similar in a similar way. I think that's so great. So you'd mentioned 20 years, and I did was scanning the website, and there was a 20-year vision that was set out for the company in 2023, and we're now 2 years in. Obviously, the last 2 years have been, I would say, unpredictable a little bit as far as kind of what's taken place over the last 2 years globally. I guess my question is the state of travel, I mean, where you thought it would be, or I guess, what has changed the most in the last 2 years, and how do you see the next 5 years playing out?
Yeah. What a great reflection point, because in 2022, as we were preparing for our, 20th anniversary, we were still in the midst of the pandemic, and we're just starting to come out of the pandemic. And I think that, that era of uncertainty had, still had begun and, still remains. And I think that it kind of ushered in a whole new chapter of, is there anything that's for certain anymore? Or does anybody really have a great crystal ball into the future? And I don't think anybody really does. And I think we could spend probably all of our time on this question alone, because it's so interesting. Because, if you think about it, most organizations have strategic plans. And I know that there are a lot of entrepreneurs and leaders who are, really kind of turning away from strategic plans, because they say there's just no way you can do a 5-year strategic plan because there is so much uncertainty. What you need is to be able to ensure that, as an organization or a company, that you have nimbleness and you have the ability to pivot, and you are flexible, and you have great thought leadership that's going to allow you to be able to pivot into the places that you need to. And I think that that is, as I mentioned, with the evolution of tourism cares, how we have evolved, from that standpoint. There was a point, and I was just joining the board, 2012, where we had our first global event. And that was a big, big step for tourism cares. We were primarily North American based, and to really step out and say, and even after doing one global event, we couldn't say we're a global organization. It's taken quite some time. And now that we're working with over 40 different destinations on our meaningful travel map, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that later on. But excuse me, I think we're finally at a place where we're starting to say that we're truly a global impact organization, and that just takes time. So when I think about the next 5 years, we want to continue to make a greater global impact. We need to continue to put a spotlight on local communities all throughout the world. And, I think right now, everything in terms of the balance, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I mean, that destinations are really uh, challenged with these days, is really where I think a lot of the focus is going to be. And that has to do with, the fact that, very well publicized, but a lot of destinations are facing over tourism, or they're facing local sentiment that's pushing back against tourism, when tourism has been, something that they have relied upon and continue to rely upon. But yet now local sentiment is getting louder. So how do we combat that? How do we find the right balance? Mass tourism, I still remember 10, 15 years ago where it was a small percentage of people that had passports, and now a much larger segment of the populace has passports, and people are traveling. And that whole element of, there's this remote place that you should visit, or you should think about visiting, that seemed so absolutely inconceivable. Now, just about anywhere in the world seems like, because of social media and because of the exposure that these places get, they seem attainable and they seem like something that we can all put on our bucket list.
Yeah, I I know I've been exposed to a lot of that personally, and I think one of the podcasts we had done before that it kind of speaks to that is when you break down the different phases of the trip booking process, and well, the one that I see a lot is the inspiration phase. And when you're doing some searches or whatever, and yet social influencers are really out there and you know promoting different spots and make them very very appealing. But yeah, I'm really we'll get to we'll get to the balance, I think, portion like a little bit later on, because I am really curious to get your take on that in particular, when we do contemplate the notion of over tourism and the and just the influx of travelers, particularly air travel. But I did want to kind of pivot a little bit into this notion of cultural like diversity, when it comes to the globality of travel. Like regions now are not too far away, but I think just in general, just all of the different aspects of cultural diversity with travel is something that I don't think personally, I don't think it gets enough attention, frankly. And having the awareness of you're going to a place that is likely very much different compared to different social norms that you may be used to. But when thinking about it in the context of environmental consciousness or sustainability, what are some countries that you've seen firsthand that are taking those types of things like the environment and sustainability seriously through policy reform or other types of tactics?
Yeah, we're so fortunate to work with so many different destinations that have really stewarded their destination around sustainability, around meaningful travel. We like to call it meaningful travel. It's just a much more kind of accessible term for everybody. And the first destination that we partnered with, in terms of building out the meaningful travel map that I referred to before, was Jordan in 2018. And I think that a lot of the things that we've already discussed really weave in so well when we talk about Jordan, because Jordan back in 2018, think about 2018, that term bucket list was definitely part of the vernacular, and everyone had a bucket list, and everyone had Petra on their bucket list, or let's say a large significant number of people did. And whereas Jordan was super excited that people were going to come and visit Petra, they recognized that they were a bit of a secondary destination that was tied with trips to the Middle East. When people go to Israel or Egypt, they tack on Jordan. They were afraid that, if people wanted to come to Petra, they would just come for a short period of time. They wanted to encourage them to get off the beaten path so that they would actually have a touch point with the people and the culture and really fall in love with that aspect of the country. And that would make them come back. Because I think that's the thing about a bucket list that's a little bit dangerous, is that people check it off and they move to the next item on their bucket list, and they don't really think about going back to the countries and diving in deeper. And this was the opportunity to work with a country like Jordan to develop a meaningful travel map that involved 12 different social enterprises along the Jordan Trail that were further out. They were fledgling types of organizations, but they all had a social or environmental purpose. To give you one example, Iraq Al Amir, a women's cooperative, brought in women from the community and taught them various different trade opportunities for them to learn how to, to weave, to make product, to be able to make and sell product through the cooperative. And they, at the time in 2018, they involved about, I think the number was around 17 women from the community. And I had the opportunity to go back there last year, and they're now engaging over 200 women from the community. So it's incredible how that our map that we worked on together with the Jordan Tourism Board has really helped those local communities, help for the money that comes into the country via tourism to stay in those local communities, and for what was that original objective for people to really get a touch point with the culture, the authentic culture of Jordan. And that's really what makes people want to come back. And I know personally that, it made such a mark on me that any opportunity that I have to go back to Jordan, I will. But we've really been so fortunate to work with so many different great examples. Visit Scotland's another great example of a member partner right now who we're engaged with to build out their meaningful travel map. They've integrated it into everything they do in terms of sustainability and their organizational policies. So, as you mentioned, like, making it really foundational. And as a result, they've invested in rewilding efforts. They have sustainable accommodations. They are focusing on heritage-based community tourism. So it really is a core value for Visit Scotland, and we're excited to partner with them. We did our Meaningful Travel Summit in Panama last year, and that was a great runway into community tourism. Prior to our summit, I had the opportunity to judge a community tourism contest that involved a number of different community enterprises coming forth, and there were 25 semifinalists in 5 different categories. So they had 5 semifinalists in each category. We had to choose a winner in each category, and then we had to choose an ultimate overall winner. And that overall winner got to go to the Adventure Travel Trade Association World Summit in Hokkaido, Japan. They got to go to the USTOA annual meeting in Los Angeles. And this was a small community enterprise that focused on sea turtle preservation. They literally brought you down to the beach. They showed you the protected area. They showed you their conservation efforts. You took part in understanding what they were doing, understanding what this community had to offer, and how they were protecting their natural resources. And this young company, this young community-based enterprise that was born out of just something that they felt was necessary for their community, has now turned into a commercial tourism enterprise. And that is being incorporated into tour operator itineraries, and travel advisors are recommending them. So this is exactly the kind of runway that we're trying to create for countries that are willing to make this type of investment.
And what is the name of that company so we can plug them here on the podcast if you don't mind saying?
I have to actually recall their
Okay.
name. I know them by reputation, but I will definitely get back to you on that.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I applaud all these all these different types of organizations that are really trying to make an impact and make a concerted effort. I think that how you frame it as meaningful, I think is a great term. Honestly, I think it's one that we need to put our heads together on and then get some more branding out there around it. I think it sounds like a great mission and a great core value that a lot of other companies should take notice of. But we're going to take a quick break, and then we will come back. We have a few more questions to ask Greg. I am Clay Coomer, the head of marketing at Battleface. This is the Travel Insights podcast, and I am with Greg Takehara, CEO of Tourism Cares. Stick with us, and we'll be right back. The Travel Insights podcast is powered by Battleface. Battleface started in the UK market in 2018, offering travel protection to journalists covering news stories in conflict zone areas. What began as one product in one country has expanded to a global, multi-regional company on a mission to power the travel insurance industry. Battleface, built for today's travelers and building for tomorrow's. Welcome back to the Travel Insights podcast powered by Battleface. I'm your host, Clay Coomer, sitting alongside with our guest today, Greg Takehara, the CEO of Tourism Cares. And we're going to jump back into this with a couple more questions for Greg to really get into more of his worldly experience in the realm of travel and tourism. And Greg, I'm gonna pivot here and go into one of my favorite topics, which is brand, and really talking a little bit about the framing of Tourism Cares. So, as a brand marketer, I personally love how you have framed Tourism Cares with its mission and its values, and how you all are, make that a part of the DNA of your company. I admire that a lot. And maybe just walk our listeners through some of maybe the key highlights or takeaways from what was described as like your brand compass, and really what kind of guides you all.
Well, I mean, let me just start with a lot of gratitude to a great team. Um, we're just so blessed at Tourism Cares to have just an incredible blend of, you know, experience and tenure and bright minds. And I think I had shared with, I shared with you, obviously, my own personal journey. So I feel like I've been there for the entire 20 years. I've been really fortunate to have at least three to four team members who have been with Tourism Cares as part of the staff for over 15 years. So amongst the 11, we have, that solid core foundation. And then because we're now virtual, we're able to hire from all around the country, and we've been able to add some great new talent. And part of that has been really building out our marketing team, and really fortunate to have Whitney, who came from Explore Asheville. So as we work with DMOs, to have, a marketing expert who came from one of the destinations really speaks so strongly to our work. And Grace is our marketing manager. And they're both led by the amazing Jessica Flores, who everybody who knows Tourism Cares knows Jess. She's been with the organization over 3/4, as I mentioned, of the 20-year history. And so Jess is our chief experience officer. And at the time of the pandemic, she stepped into the marketing role. But I think for us, a lot of it is, and we're still on this journey, as so many organizations are, with especially impact organizations, really moving from just sheer storytelling to really building some solid metrics. And so when I talk to you about how we built that meaningful travel map, we've built it to now over 500 impact partners on that map, represented by, as I mentioned, working with over 40 DMOs. So that kind of shows the scale. So now we're beyond just telling individual stories, but we're really able to put forward some really solid metrics. And so first of all, a really solid team. But secondly, it's kind of when you mentioned the brand compass and you mentioned kind of our approach, and I talk about that evolution, sometimes that can get very mixed, in terms of how you brand. So we always like to kind of break it down into pillars and just say, we unite the industry, we inspire, and we activate. And I think when we think about our volunteer legacy, all of those three were components. We just inspired in a little different way. We activated in a little different way. We still united the industry. That's been a constant. And now, as we do more education and training, we're inspiring in a different way. But we still have the programmatic work that we have in our meaningful travel summits to bring everybody together, to put a spotlight on our impact partners in various different communities. And that really leaves people with an incredible inspiration point, and that allows them to activate. We always make sure that at the last day of our event or in the final hours of our event, any programmatic event, we ask all of our attendees to think about what they've learned, to think about how they've been inspired, to think about the conversations that they've had, and to make a commitment and have that commitment bear some impact on their home, their workplace, their community. And that is what we then kind of hold them accountable to or really help them with. And we like to say that we meet everybody where they're at, no matter whether they're just starting their journey or not, into meaningful travel. And that whole aspect of collaboration over competition comes full circle because of the fact that we are then able to introduce people who are just starting their journey with those who have gone through the journey. And oftentimes, that will allow for them to not have to stumble in ways that others have already stumbled going through the journey. And it allows for people to meet that wouldn't have otherwise met and become, helpers for each other and friends and supporters. And to me, that's what that's all about. So our brand compass is always kind of around those pillars. And I don't think our brand will ever change in that regard. We will inspire and activate in different ways based on what is needed and how we pivot. But we'll always unite the industry. We'll always inspire in some way, and we'll always activate in some way.
Wow. That is inspiring to me. One, because to hear a person like yourself say things like brand pillars, and that they will never change. That is something that if people that in the marketing realm are listening or watching this will appreciate, because those foundational elements and establishing those key pillars and having some conviction and passion behind that is definitely in my experience a top down kind of approach, right? If you yourself as the leader of Tourism Cares doesn't live and breathe that and advocate for it, then it'll be hard for the rest of the organization to kind of buy in. That probably speaks to you as your involvement in the organization as to why you've had people hang around for over a decade, and that is incredibly admirable, and I love that too. Where it's simple, right? You've simplified it with inspiring, uniting, and activating. Those are three things that I think we all can get behind, right? And you can build on that with all the different messaging and positioning tactics within that. So fanboying over that for sure. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you know, yeah, the toolkits are extensive. I mean, we can throw a ton of toolkits at you, but we like to keep it simple from that standpoint so that we can really get people to engage and not feel intimidated whatsoever. But we want them to know there's a lot of resources for them. But we keep it simple by explaining those pillars and then opening up those toolkits and saying, it's all there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And staying a little bit on this topic of brand and things that tourism cares about, right? So I noticed there's a hashtag that's on the website. It was hashtag when tourism cares, and I thought that was an inspiring hashtag for one, but maybe expand on the hashtag a little bit, and how you think that the world, like how the world would look if more, I guess, people bought in to caring around, I guess, conscious tourism or meaningful destinations and things like that. What would it? I mean, what would a scenario look like if more people cared?
I think we're getting there, let's hope we're getting there. I think like anything else, and you being in the marketing space, can identify with brands going viral or brands becoming movements. And, that's our hope. And I think you have to create a connection point, for your brand. And for us, again, just like those pillars, we've never been able to waver from our name. We may have pivoted the work that we do or our focus areas, or whether we've been more North American based or now much more global. We're still under that brand name, that moniker of Tourism Cares, and caring is just a universal term that everybody can identify. We talked about, how we like to use the term meaningful travel. And I think meaningfulness and caring go hand in hand. And I think that as a result, you know, no matter where you stand in our industry, it's something that should resonate with you. I think we all understand the transformative nature of travel and tourism, how it can and should change your life. When you go to a place and you get to, meet new people and go to new places and have your eyes opened in ways that you didn't even think was possible. So along those lines, when tourism cares, I think for me, it's always kind of like that, finishing exclamation point to whatever message you are putting out there, especially on social media, where oftentimes we're putting forth best practice examples. So why not, say this is an example of when tourism cares? And it's not what we're telling you, but it's what we're showing you others are doing, just by example. And so that's just such a great exclamation point to put on anything that we're trying to showcase. That's how we get people inspired, because they say, "Wow, look at the great work that these organizations are doing, these destinations are doing. We can do that too."
That's great. That's great. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy, how social media has evolved to really influence a lot of these movements. And I definitely I love just like the concept too of just like of staying on brand and holding true to your values. And I think putting that out there consistently, the more people will catch on to it and more people will ultimately care when it comes to tourism. All right, so we're going to take another quick break. It's our last break of the podcast. We're going to finish up here with Greg Takehara, CEO of Tourism Cares, and we're going to address two more questions. We're going to get Greg's take on some insights into the travel industry, and also talk about countries that are heavily reliant on tourism, and the impact that could have in the realm of mass tourism and things like that. So stick with us, and we'll get Greg's take on those two final questions of the Travel Insights podcast, powered by Battleface. The Travel Insights podcast is powered by Battleface. Battleface started in the UK market in 2018, offering travel protection to journalists covering news stories in conflict zone areas. What began as one product in one country has expanded to a global, multi-regional company on a mission to power the travel insurance industry. Battleface, built for today's travelers and building for tomorrow's. Welcome back. I'm Clay Coomer, host of the Travel Insights podcast. And with us today is our special guest from Tourism Care's CEO, Greg Takehara. We've addressed about 5 or 6 questions up until this point. It's been really, really fascinating, really interesting discussion in the realm of travel and tourism, and getting in more into my world with with branding and marketing behind the philosophy of Tourism Cares. But to kind of pivot to the brand of this podcast, the Travel Insights podcast, I did want to take one question and just kind of get your POV on, what are a few insights in the realm of travel that you're currently observing that you think more people should know about.
Well, we talked about meaningful travel and, how we define meaningful travel. What are some of the key components? I made reference to the fact that, we'd like to see more money, more of the tourism dollars stay in the local communities. So it's interesting because that aspect is being, surveyed. They're surveying travelers. They're asking them questions on, do you want your money to go back into the local communities? Do you want to leave a place better than you found it? Do you want to have authentic, meaningful experiences that are representative of the local culture? And these numbers are just steadily increasing. So we're seeing, this is part of a booking.com survey that in 2025 brought these numbers to close to about 3 out of every 4 people. And quite frankly, when it comes to the question of, do you want to leave a place better than when you came? I mean, one would think that everyone would want that universally, but somehow that's not the case. And I actually respect their honesty. But I will also say too that, and I'm always a little skeptical about surveying as well too, because people like to present their best sense of self. And a lot of times the way that we perceive ourselves is based on our values, and we think, yes, but when it comes to our actual tendencies, our actual behaviors, they don't always follow suit. That's kind of known as the say-do gap. We say one thing and what we do is another thing. So that's something that when we talk about kind of, I guess you could say, a trend, I'm always very much wanting to stay on the cusp of that, of how people see meaningful travel. And right now, people are talking about experiences, and especially when you look at a lot of the younger generations and you look at some of uh, there's a lot of studies that are talking about generational differences and what each generation's looking for. But it seems like more and more that meaningful travel experiences, that getting off the beaten path, making that connection that we talked about, is something that the traveling consumer is looking for. So we're very much trying to track that because it builds our business case. It builds that case to travel purveyors to be able to say, this is why you want to sell this. Now, we're really fortunate to be in a community where there's so many leaders who do things because it's the right thing to do. But let's face facts. There's nothing that compels people to change their strategies and to change their selling, tactics when the consumer speaks. Consumer demand, kind of dictates. And so as we see these numbers ticking up, it's something that we're reinforcing. And I had the opportunity to speak at the ASTA Global Conference, the Travel Advisors Conference in Salt Lake City last week. And I was just blown away by the number of travel advisors who are talking about kind of building their business model around meaningful experiences, talking about how they source local, talking about how they're talking to their clients about exactly that, about getting off the beaten path. And some of that, of course, as we talked about, is driven by what we see in the media. Do you want to go to a place that's over touristed? I know that personally, that wouldn't be very appealing to me. As much as I might want to go to that place, I'd say, do I need to go there when, it's being overrun or where, local sentiment is pushing back and is just not happy? I mean, we want to go to the place when we have a little bit of breathing room and when the arms of our hosts are wide open. And, I think that's what destinations are doing. They're finding that right balance of how do we engage? We want the business, but we want people to have a great experience. And the best way that they can do that is they can manage over tourism, they can manage people's expectations. And this is really what we're working on. So I think this trend is just going to continue because let's face it, life is not in the balance. So we always have to keep working on these imbalances and trying to get them to level out as best as possible. I'm in a good place. I think I've been well trained because I'm a Libra, so it's always the scales, right? I'm always trying to find the right balance.
Yeah, I'm a Leo. But I my daughter has been really into the Hamilton soundtrack recently, and what you'd said that, so this the kind of like aligns is like when I think about like generational aspects of like traveling and the differences that I mean, at least that I mean that I've seen, is that I think there is a growing population. The reason I mentioned Hamilton is because there's a line in there that Lin-Manuel Miranda says. It's like, you plant seeds in a garden that you may never see grow, right? And I think that the younger generations, that I think they're starting to see that, right, where it's like we need to be doing things for the good of the planet and the good for these communities, and the well-being of people like outside of ourselves. So like doing the right things, especially in the realm of tourism, you're even though there might be small seeds, right, you're doing something that you may not ever see grow, right? And that's my tie to Hamilton, that I'm gonna, I'm gonna throw in there, because I don't know, to me it's relevant, it may not be, I don't know.
No, I think it's completely relevant. And I think the whole aspect of thinking about things like seeds is both, what inspires some, but really is kind of a deterrent because people have a tendency, especially right now. I mean, we're in a doing age, and if you're not doing, then I mean, I'm just blown away by you have children. I don't have children, but like the kind of resume that it takes to get into, colleges these days, what kids do by the age of 17 to build their own personal resume. I mean, it just kind of blows me away. So, I think people are intimidated sometimes that, oh, well, I can only do this little thing, so that's not enough. And, and and they're so used to things like business planning and things that are very robust and have a definitive outcome. So they aren't as willing to just kind of say, well, I'm just going to do this. And, that along with what everybody else is doing is going to create a much larger impact. And I think that's the message that we have, that we're a collective community. And if we all do a little something, that collectively, that everybody's little something is going to be a lot. But we have to start there. And there's always going to be some that are going to take it to the next level. But I think the all other beauty is that once people start with that seed, they keep watering it, then it grows, then they're inspired, they plant another seed, it grows. So, it's one of those things that you just have to get people started on their journey, and then usually they're coming back to me and telling me incredible stories about what they've done.
Yeah, that's great, and I think that's another good touch point. In the realm of analogies, it's like, if you build it, they don't necessarily come, right? It's like you build it, but then you have to, play a message that's on repeat, that is consistent and can resonate, so that you can get more people, influence more people to, buy into what you're doing and become advocates, and evangelists, for the cause, in general. And what it seems, just based off our brief interaction, is that, what was built, 20 years ago, has evolved in a way that is meaningful, to kind of draw back to, your meaningful travel. And I'm personally excited to see how it continues, to evolve, and take part in it myself, both on a personal level, and also how we could work together as well, more broadly, in this travel space. One last question, then we'll wrap up here. Well, we're gonna end it on a doozy. We've obviously talked a little bit around, mass tourism, and, tourism spots that can be, overly tourized. I'm gonna make up a word, but for these countries, but there are and you know this better than most. I mean, there are a lot of countries that are heavily reliant on tourism for GDP. And I know the US, for example. I've been doing a lot of US study. US, I think is around 13 or 14 trillion GDP for tourism in the US. It's still only about 10% of US GDP. But how do these countries, travelers, travel companies, or others, I guess, balance this need for tourism, as a source of country revenue, with this desire and this need, to be more sustainable, to be more aware of cultural differences, like in the name of meaningful travel?
I mean, we've made so many different references to how destinations, as an example, are trying to find the right balance, and, how their commitments to sustainability, how they've approached that, how they've addressed, combating over tourism, creating, solutions or creating alternatives, and as well, dealing with local sentiment that has been at times wavering relative to tourism. So I won't go into all of that, but I think the other thing that I think is really important to focus on, and it really applies to countries and destinations at large, but as you mentioned, it really relates to travelers, and travel companies, and everyone. And that is that you all have a say. You just have to spend a little time. And I think that's what we are finding, is that the consumer is starting to look at the websites of the travel providers that they're considering. They're thinking about, well, do I want to give my money to what kind of company do I want to give my money to? Do I want to I'd like to give my money to a company that's doing good. So I think especially this is another thing that, has evolved, is that whole element of philanthropy. And philanthropy, I think, was something that was very much founded on how it made the donor feel. So let's go back to that day in 2003 when I was on Ellis Island and I rolled up my sleeves and I was thinking about how it made me feel like I was giving back to the industry that had given me my livelihood. I'm much more focused on Ellis Island than I'm focused on me right now. I'm
Mm.
focused on how we can ensure that we're creating positive impact for the people and places of travel, not how our giving makes us feel. And I think that that applies to companies and individuals who used to shy away from talking about how much they did or how much they gave, because there was nothing better than silent giving, like how honorable you give and you don't even want recognition. But it's important to be not only recognized, but actually put yourself out there and say, this is what we do. We give back. This is part of the core foundation of who we are as a company, because consumers and your community, which includes people who want to potentially work for your company, are looking at your website and they're evaluating you and they're thinking about, do I want to give my money to this company? Do I want to work for this company? Do I want to associate with this company? And I think that's the aspect of, how things have changed and how we all have a say in what we do and how we can create greater collective positive impact for the people and places of travel. We all are making decisions, and our decisions have an impact on people and places that we don't see, that we don't touch. But when we make a decision, when we make a travel decision, we are making exactly that decision. And so that, along with the fact that, that's that tenet of Tourism Cares of We Unite, I think is something that every destination, every company should also incorporate, which is that, it isn't just your board of directors, it's your community. Get everybody to the table. Bring everybody to the table. Give everybody a voice. The indigenous peoples of the land that you're on, think about the legacy that they bring. Think about the forefathers that have set the groundwork for you being there. Give them a voice at the table. And, if we allow everybody to have at least a voice at the table, ultimately the decisions that are made will never make everyone happy, but everybody will appreciate the fact that they had a voice.
Well, I certainly hope our listeners catch the end of this because that was the most profound and just accurate thing. I mean, I've heard for our time together. And you've said a lot of really great things, and I, for one, am glad that you made the decision to join us on this podcast. I love what you guys are doing. I definitely appreciate the mission and the values, and super admirable. And it's definitely a call to action too, right? And I think from like when you mentioned brand pillars with, building a brand is not easy, right? I mean, we all can't sign, Michael Jordan to endorse our shoes, and right. And I think just the grassroots nature of it all and the authenticity around it and the consistency and the compassion that you bring to this. It's so admirable. I love to see it, especially in the realm of travel in this industry. So I do think a lot of times, and you've worked in travel insurance, and I think it's easy to get hung up and the next big thing, and what's the the strategic plan, aligned to a product roadmap, and all the various things, and measuring the amount of revenue that can be generated from X, Y, and Z, right? And I think that, at the end of the day, and not to oversimplify, but if companies, take a stand and really plant themselves in a space or a cause or a mission that can be admirable and can draw in people organically. I mean, that's how you grow. And that's kind of how I feel, and just based off what you've been talking about. And yeah, Greg, I appreciate you spending time with me today on the Travel Insights podcast. Definitely look forward to seeing Tourism Cares progress, and the mission continuing on, and how it will evolve. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Clay, for having me and for allowing us to put a spotlight on Tourism Cares.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we can bring you on again sometime in the future. We can talk about maybe some other topics, but for now, this has been the Travel Insights podcast powered by Battleface. I'm your host, Clay Coomer. We've been joined by CEO of Tourism Cares, Greg Takehara. And we will see you again next time on the Travel Insights podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in.